The wind carried the scent of dust and dry hay across the rolling fields of the Carson ranch, where the sun seemed to hang low and lazy, painting everything in the gold of another hard day. Luke Carson leaned against the corral fence, his hat pulled low to shade his eyes from the glare. Sweat traced paths down his sunburned neck, and his shirt clung to his back. Beyond the fence, two small boys chased each other through the patchy grass, their laughter light but fleeting, swallowed by the vast silence that always seemed to follow. They were his brother's boys, Ethan, age 8, and little Tommy, barely 5. Just 2 years ago, Luke had been the ranch hand, the free spirit, the one who'd ride into town once a month just to blow off steam. But ever since the accident that took his brother Jacob and sister-in-law Mary, everything changed. The laughter that once filled this ranch had died with them. Luke didn't know how to be a father. He only knew how to work, how to survive, how to keep moving. Every morning, he woke before dawn to feed the horses, check the fences, and fix whatever the last storm had broken. Every night, he sat at the kitchen table long after the boys were asleep, staring at the ledger and wondering how much longer they could hold on. The debts had piled up faster than the harvests, and the old barn roof leaked when it rained. But Luke didn't complain. He couldn't. The boys needed someone strong, steady. He had promised Jacob, over the grave, on that bitter winter morning, that he'd raise them right. Keep them together, Luke, Jacob had said. Don't let this ranch die. The promise burned in his chest like an oath carved in stone. Then, that morning, just as the day began to fade into another lonely evening, she came. He first saw her walking up the dirt road that led to the ranch house, a woman in a faded blue dress, her hair pulled back, her steps careful but determined. She carried a basket wrapped in a checkered cloth, and when she reached the porch, the faint smell of fresh bread drifted in with her. Luke had just finished mending the trough when he noticed her shadow stretching across the yard. "Afternoon," she said softly, her voice warm but steady. "I brought something for the boys." He stood there, unsure what to say. Women didn't just show up at the Carson ranch anymore. Not since the funeral. "They're inside," he finally said, brushing his hands on his jeans. "But you didn't have to." "I wanted to," she interrupted gently, her eyes meeting his. "They helped me last week when my wagon wheel broke outside town. I promised I'd bring them some bread." She smiled then, not wide or showy, just a quiet curve of kindness, and it did something strange to Luke. It stirred something he hadn't felt in months. "Peace. Name's Clara," she said, offering her hand. He hesitated before taking it. "Luke Carson." "I know," she said, her smile deepening just a little. "Everyone in town does. You've been keeping this place going all by yourself." Luke shifted uncomfortably. "Trying to." Clara's eyes flicked toward the house. "Mind if I say hello to the boys?" He nodded, though his guard stayed up. Folks around town had stopped visiting months ago. Some out of pity, others because they didn't know what to say. But Clara, she didn't carry pity in her voice. Only warmth. Inside, the boys' faces lit up when they saw her. Tommy ran straight for the basket, his small hands clapping in delight. "Miss Clara, you really came." "I did," she said, kneeling to his level and unveiling the warm loaf of bread, its crust golden, the smell filling the old kitchen like sunlight through dusty windows. "And I brought a little jam too. Fig, your favorite, right?" Ethan's eyes widened. "You remembered." Luke leaned in the doorway, silent. He hadn't seen him smile like that in months. As she set the table, Clara glanced around the room. The place was tidy but worn. Old curtains, cracked dishes, a floor that creaked with every step. Yet there was something sacred in that simplicity. She could see the effort Luke had put into keeping it alive. "You do all this yourself?" she asked as she sliced the bread. Luke nodded. "Most days." "And the cooking?" He chuckled dryly. "If you can call beans and coffee cooking." She smiled again, that same quiet, knowing smile. "Then it's a good thing I brought more than bread." That evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, the small family, though they weren't truly one, shared their first warm meal together. Clara's laughter blended with the boys', soft and genuine, and Luke found himself watching her more than he meant to. There was something in her that reminded him of peace, the kind he thought he'd buried long ago. When she finally stood to leave, Luke walked her out. The air was cool, and the first stars had begun to show. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "For the bread, and for tonight." She met his gaze. "They're good boys. You're doing a fine job, Luke." He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he wasn't doing fine at all, that every night he lay awake wondering if he'd failed them, but her words made him believe, just for a moment, that maybe he could do this. As she turned to leave, Tommy called from the doorway, "Come again, Miss Clara." She smiled back, "I will," and she did. Weeks passed like the slow turn of a wagon wheel. Clara came to the ranch every few days, always with something warm in her basket, biscuits, stew, or just fresh bread that made the whole house smell alive again. But it wasn't just the food she brought. It was laughter. It was light. Ethan began helping her in the kitchen, proud to show he could knead dough without making a mess. Tommy followed her like a shadow, eager for every story she told. Stories of her late parents, of her small cottage on the edge of town, of how she'd once dreamed of being a teacher before life had other plans. Luke, meanwhile, worked harder than ever. But it wasn't just the ranch he was tending now. It was his heart. He'd find himself glancing toward the house from the fields, catching a glimpse of her silhouette through the window, humming softly while the boys laughed around her. At night, he'd lie awake listening to the faint echoes of that laughter and wonder if maybe, just maybe, God hadn't forgotten about them after all. Still, he fought the feeling. He was a man who'd lost too much to risk losing again. And he knew that the moment he let someone close, fate had a cruel way of taking him away. One late afternoon, the sky turned strange, purple and gray, with the kind of stillness that makes even the horses restless. Luke stood by the barn, watching the clouds roll heavy from the west. "Storm's comin'," he muttered. Clara was inside with the boys, helping them pack away the laundry. When Luke came in, wind whipping at his hat, he said, "You'd better stay, till it passes. That road'll turn to mud soon." She hesitated but nodded. "All right." By the time the rain hit, it came hard, sheets of it, slamming against the windows, turning the yard into a river. The wind howled like something alive. Inside, the boys huddled close while Luke stoked the fire higher. Lightning flashed, thunder cracked, and Tommy whimpered. Clara pulled him into her arms. "It's just the sky talkin', sweetheart," she whispered. "It'll tire out soon." Luke watched her, the way she calmed them, the way her presence softened the edges of their fear. For a long time, he said nothing. But when the lights flickered and the roof began to drip, he grabbed a bucket and muttered, "Guess the barn ain't the only thing leakin'." Clara smiled gently. "Every home's got its scars, Luke." He paused. "You talk like you know something about that." "I do," she said quietly. "When my husband passed, I couldn't bear to stay in that house alone. Every board creaked with memories. Every shadow whispered his name. But one morning, I decided grief wasn't gonna run my life anymore. So I baked bread, and shared it." Luke met her gaze, rain pounding the roof above them. "And that's what brought you here." "Yes," she said. "Maybe this is where I was meant to bring it." He turned away, his jaw tightening, because her kindness was doing something dangerous. It was making him feel again. When the worst of the storm passed, the house was dark except for the flicker of the fire. The boys had fallen asleep on the rug, curled under a blanket. Clara stood to check the window, her hair loose now, her dress clinging slightly from the humidity. Luke rose too, stepping closer without thinking. The silence between them was thick, full of everything they hadn't said. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" she asked softly. "For making this house feel like home again." Her breath caught. "You did that yourself, Luke. I just reminded you what warmth feels like." He looked at her then, really looked, and something inside him broke open. All the walls he'd built since Jacob's death, all the guilt and fear and loneliness, they crumbled in that moment. He reached out, brushed a damp strand of hair from her cheek. "You deserve better than a broken cowboy and a leaky roof." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I don't need better. Maybe I just need real." And for the first time in years, Luke Carson leaned in, not out of need, not out of loneliness, but out of gratitude, out of the quiet truth that this woman had brought him back to life. Their lips met in the soft light of the fire, gentle, hesitant, and full of promise. Outside, the storm finally died.